Hi, I'd like to introduce you to two modules to two VCV modules I worked on, which are Regex and Regex condensed, which are so they are basically the same. The only difference is that the condensed one have 12 lines, while this one, the regular one, only have 8, but is more readable. So basically, these are sequences. So each line here is a sequencer. It can output either a clock output, a clock sequence, or a pitch sequence. And the whole idea of these modules is to be able to connect them, to connect sequencers between themselves, like a clock to a clock, a pitch to a clock to a pitch, and so on, from these inputs and these outputs. So I'm going to start with the clock mode, the clock sequencer mode. So I'm going to use the DocB clock generator, put it on the first input of this line, and take the line output and put it here. So the idea is that the sequences are defined by patterns you write here, right? Okay, so you have different values. You can put numbers. You can also put pitch, but that's more usually used for the pitch sequence. So how does the clock mode work? If I put 1 here and compile, so I just have to press enter. Perhaps lower the volume. Okay, so basically it acts like a clock divider. So 1 does not do anything. 2. Simply divide by 2, right? 3. So okay, so that's really simple. But what about putting a sequence of value like 1 and then 2? Okay, and then 3. Okay, so as you might see right here, you have the current, the active value that is highlighted, so it's easier to follow the sequence. So it's read from left to right, and then it restarts on the first value. But this is the forward kind of sequence, because forward is the default one. So this is forward if you want to put it, but you don't have to. You also have backward, and you have ping pong. So here I switched the sequence to a pitch sequence so that it's easier to show you the other type of sequence. So so the pitch sequence works the same way for the clock. So you put it in the first input, but then you take the output as a volt per octave value, and you write a really simple sequence here, right? Sequence. I press enter, so it's compiled, and then I use the same gate here. Okay, so I'm gonna show you the same sequence type. So forward, already ready, backward, ping pong, random, basic, pseudo random, which is random, which avoids the last picked value. Shuffle, which will take the sequence, shuffles it, and then play all the values. And once it's done, it restarts, so it will shuffle the sequence again. And then the last one, walk, which will simply randomly take an item on the left or on the right of the previously picked item. Now these types of sequence, they have different behaviors depending on the length of the sequence. So the length of the sequence is defined by the number of value you do have here. Okay, so here I will play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 value. We pick walk seven times, and then I will automatically reset and go back to the left one. That's why even if it's the walk sequence, sometimes you have a jump to the first one, right? But we do have modulators that allows you to change the sequence length. So what if I put times 4 here and then press enter? So as you might see, you don't have the jump to the beginning as often as it was. And then if I put the shuffle sequence, right? So it will shuffle the sequence, plays the shuffle sequence 4 times before it restarts, and then shuffle the sequence again. Then this is the first modulator, but you also have other modulators. So I will show you this on the forward sequence. So the idea of the modulo modulator is to say, okay, so this sequence has a size, a length, but I only want four values. I only want to pull four values of this sequence. If I put 8, perhaps 10 will be clear. You see that it work on the whole sequence, and then go back here and automatically restarts. So it will play the sequence until it pulls 10 values and then restarts it. So what about 16? So these are the modulators on pitch mode, but what about the clock mode? So I will have this really simple sequence. Compile it. Then so if I multiply it by 4, the result is exactly the same here, as it's a forward sequence, but on random. But the most interesting here is the modulo. So it does not really act the modulo does not really act on the clock on clock sequences, just like the pitch sequences, as it will count the triggers it receives and not the values it outputs. So what about 16 here? So it will output triggers, but when the sequence reached 16 triggers on the input, it will restart, which allows you to build to more easily build a drum sequence. What about the backward one? And the big bong? So basically the modulo here helps you to build more regular and syncable rhythms. So these were really simple sequences, but you can build way more complex sequence here. So I came back to the pitch mode, and I will build a simple a simple sequence. So often I do use brackets, and I that's an advice. You should use brackets when you build a more complex sequence for clarity, and sometimes for the syntax check. So I will use small sequence here, like E. Okay, and then put another sequence in this sequence. Okay, I put the pitch here, and then take the exact same and compare it. Okay, so how? What here? So it will play these 3 values forward, and then this whole sequence just after these values. But this sequence has a length of 3 values, right? That's why we pick, perhaps this one is clear. Okay, so you have use. What about the backward sequence? Okay, but if I put a modulator here, I will pick only one value here. And the whole idea that you can do anything. You can put sequences into sequences and do whatever you want. Now, what about connecting sequences? So I will remove this for now. So I have this speech sequence, and then I will build a really small, the exact same one, clock sequence. I need a clock here, right? And I will remove this one and take the output of this sequence, which is now a clock sequence, to this one. Then I will take the output, the pitch output, and take the sequence, the trigger sequence I just created here, right here, and then so this is the most basic connection you can have here. But what about connecting like a pitch sequence with another pitch sequence? So the idea is that on the second input of the pitch a pitch sequence, you can put a pitch offset. So if I have pitch sequence of 0 with the same clock, put it here. It doesn't change anything. But if I put 12 in semitones, I have an octave offset. 24 minus 12. Okay, but the idea is that you can put sequences here. Random sequences. So here on the pitch sequence, I used numbers. So when you use numbers, these are semitones. But but you can also put pitch, as you might have showed you here. So C4 in volt per octave is basically 0, so you don't have any offset. But you can also, as an offset, use C5, which will act as an octave up. 3 and an octave down, right? So I can basically write the exact same sequence here with pitch. Now we can also connect clock sequences to other clock sequences, even if it can create really weird stuff. What about creating like a really cheap Bernoulli gate here? So I'll create this small sequence and reset everything here. So I will take the output of this trigger clock sequence, put it on the input of this one, and then use it here. So if I put one every time, that's the output is basically the same. But if I put 0 here with a random sequence, sometimes as I used zero or negative values, skip the triggers. So it is basically one chance on 4 to skip the received trigger here. So here I still use this sequence to drive the pitch sequences, but I can also use the modified one, skipped one here, which will create a more unusual sequence, basically. Now, what about the bias knob and the bias input you have here? So the bias knob basically will change the behavior of random sequences. So this sequence is not random at all. This sequence has a bit of randomness here. These sequences are completely random. So this is on 0. But if I put it down, you will see that you will pick random values on the left side of the sequence, which reduce the chance here to have a trigger. Put it on the right. I will have higher pitch because the sequence is built like this, and I have all the chances to trigger. What about using an LFO here? So when you have an input, a connection, you can use this button as an inverter. So perhaps I will use this, so it does not repeat the 0 here. Okay, so I'm gonna try to change this. What about doing this weird stuff? So what happens here? So I put this small sequence, which is a simple forward sequence, into another sequence which contains only this one. So the idea here is that, as you might see, it's F, G, A, F, G, A. So the idea is that this sequence is reset only when it reached its own end, not when its parents reach its end. So the idea is that it will start on F, and then this sequence, which has a modulator of 1, which only pull the first value, and stop, and then we go back to C, D, and E, and then we come back to the sequence, which is now on G, right, and so on. Perhaps I will use the unmodified trigger here. And now, what about using a pitch sequence to create CV? So I'll do a shuffle sequence. Have a small, no, let's say like this, and then I multiply it by, let's say 8, right? And I give it the same clock here. So I compile it and then use it here. Perhaps here. So I showed you how the pitch sequence use the first input has the clock and second input as a pitch offset, but clock sequences also have two inputs. So the first is the exact same, so it's a clock, but the second one is another clock. So you can combine, basically you can combine clocks. So what if I put just one? Okay, I will take this clock here and then a slower one. Okay, so I have this one, slower one, a fast one, and then I have both. They are mixed. Okay, so here the modulator does not really make sense, but what about taking this sequence but reset it every beat? Perhaps not every beat. Okay, so you can create more complex and if you are better than me, more interesting sequences, right? So these sequencers also have a reset input, so this can be used to connect. This can be used as a way to connect sequence. Like if I do compound this, I still need a clock actually. Okay, so it's simply divided by 4, but here I can have like, I don't know, 3, 1, 2, 1 with the same clock. But what if I want it to be the two sequences to be synced? Then I can take the end of cycle output here of this sequence and put it in the reset input. So here it resets way too soon, but I can have like this. Or a simpler way to do that is by doing this. But I kind of prefer this one when I can see what's happening. Okay, what about another one, like 1 1 2 1, which is driven by the same clock, and then I have a really simple one that will use the output of this one and the output of this one, so they are basically mixed. what about using this small sequence, pitch sequence, to do not pitch but simply CV, like, I don't know, multiplied by perhaps 4, driven by the same clock, and output to use it as, I don't know, perhaps so it's important to, when you want to create more complex sequence, when you want to have sequences into sequences, to use the brackets here, right? To define what you want, not just put like this. You have to put it into the bracket. It doesn't make any sense, but here. Otherwise it's not, it won't work, but for now at least I really have to fix it, but the syntax check does not show any error, but it won't work. As you might see, this is not handled right now once it's in bracket.